do the whole poem. Just going to do a stanza and a half. I can tell you right now that a little commercial for those who are Hebrew speakers. So this evening at the Har Chorev Shul in Chavtet November, where they have a weekly shiur on some Tanakh subject with rotating lecturers. So as it is tonight, I will be giving it the shiur on another stanza of this that has to do with today's date, the 8th of Tevet. So let's just see what happened on the 8th of Tevet. We're going to see that the Tzom HaAsiri, the fast of the 10th month, which is the fast of Tevet, carries with it several dates and several occurrences. So if we just begin with the source page, the second side on the bottom, start with source number 7, the last source. And the Gemara deals with the particular date and occurrence of what happened in the month of Tevet. Based on the pasuk in Zechariah, what happens is that Zechariah is the Navi, one of the 3 prophets of the beginning of the second Beit HaMikdash era, and he has asked a halachic question, a shaila, ha'evke et tzoma chamishi. Should we still continue fasting Tisha B'Av? It's a legitimate question. We're building the second Beit HaMikdash, so what's the deal with the fast days that commemorate the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash? You would think that logic would dictate we would dispense with these fast days because now we have a Beit HaMikdash up and running. Or there might be some other reason that we should continue fasting. And he gives a wonderful answer, except we don't have a clue what he answered. The answer is beautiful. He says, Koma Hashem, God says, Tzoma Revi'i, the fast of the 4th month, which is Tammuz, Tzoma Chamishi, the 5th month, which is Av, Tzoma Shvi'i, the 7th month, which is Tishrei, referring to Tzom Gedalia, and Tzoma Asiri, the month of Tevet, Yiyeh lebeit Yehuda l'soson l'simcha u'lemoadim tovim. Are going to be Yamim Tovim. The only problem is when. B'diuk. When. What is he talking about? So the commentaries really go to town on this and try to explain. And most poskim seem to think that in the second Beit HaMikdash era, we did not fast these days, and they were reenacted again after the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. The Rambam disagrees, and his Mishnah commentary to Masechet Rosh Hashanah says that during the entire period of the second Beit HaMikdash, we continued fasting on Tisha B'Av. With regard to the other 3 fast days, Shavuos B'Tammuz and Tzom Gedalia and Tzom B'Tevet, it was optional, which means it was still on the books, but that's a halachic discussion, why optional? But Tisha B'Av was mandatory, even in the period of the second Beit HaMikdash. So the Gemara says here, trying to define what is the Tzom HaAsiri, the fast of the 4th month, 10th month, it says, Zu Asiri B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, which is this coming Friday, Shabo Samach Melech Bavel al Yerushalayim, that Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, lay siege around Yerushalayim. This was about 2.5 years before the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. And as it says in Yechezkel Perek Kaf Daled, Vayi Devar Hashem Elai, B'Shana HaTshi'it, B'Chodesh HaAsiri, the 9th month, Ba'esor L'Chodesh, the 10th of the month. You can't get it wrong here. It's the 10th of the 10th, the 10th day of the 10th month. And he says, Ktov Lecha Et Shem Hayom Et Etzem Hayom Hazeh. Write this down. Let it be posted for posterity that Samach Melech Bavel El Yerushalayim, that the king of Bavel, Nebuchadnezzar, lay siege around Yerushalayim. So the date is very clear. The event is very clear. Now, this is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, interpreting the phrase in Zechariah, Tzom HaAsiri, the fast of the 10th month. It means Asara B'Tevet as we know it. Except that a colleague of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon, challenges this, and he says, no, Tzom HaAsiri means a different date and a different event. Nobody's challenging the fact that Nebuchadnezzar lay siege around Yerushalayim on the 10th of Tevet. That's a pasuk in Yechezkel. The question is, did they make a public fast day about that event? And Rabbi Shimon says, no, that event was an event, tragic as it was, but there was no fast day around that event. The fast day of the 5th of the 10th month had to do with the 5th of Tevet, which was last Sunday. The 5th of Tevet. What happened on the 5th of Tevet? A half a year after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, news reached Bavel. The diaspora in Bavel caught wind of the fact that a half a year ago, the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. Now, I have to think a little bit. This is before CNN reporting breaking news. So they didn't know. So I'll just give you a little bit of an example to what this is all about. So on a nice sunny day, you look at the sun, you see, I see the sun right now. No, you're looking at the sun 8.5 minutes ago. Where's the sun now? It's moved. It's 8.5 minutes different. Because it takes, from the speed of light, it takes 8.5 minutes for the sunlight to reach planet Earth. And that's the closest planet to Earth as we know. Alpha Centauri is the second closest planet to Earth, and that's 4.2 light years away. Now you can see it without a telescope. You can see it. On a clear night, if you know what you're looking at, you can see Alpha Centauri. You know what you're seeing? You're seeing the light that was emitted from Alpha Centauri over 4 years ago, 4.2 light years away. I mean, it's amazing, just to think for a second. Where's Alpha Centauri now? It's not there. It's somewhere else because it's 4.2 years later. So when we talk about news traveling, it took a half a year. And there was a palit, a refugee, somebody was able to get out of the furnace of the burning Yerushalayim, makes it to Bavel on the 5th of Tevet, and reports Hukta Ha'ir, the city was destroyed. And they decided to fast on the 5th of Tevet to teach you Gadol Yom HaShmu'ah, just hearing the bad news, Ki Yom Sreifat Beit Elokeinu. So you already have two dates in Tevet as being maybe the Tzom HaAsiri, the 10th that we observe, that's Rabbi Akiva's opinion, or Rabbi Shimon, maybe it's the 5th, and we don't do that. Right, so today all shiurim are sponsored by Eli and Adele Friedwald to commemorate the yahrzeit of Adele's late father, Rav Aram Yaakov ben Yechiel Tzvi, and as usual, the entire series in memory of Elisheva Sima Bat Zalman Zechuna Livracha. Okay.
So what you just said.
Yeah.
I have two questions. First of all, when it came time for Kiddush HaChodesh, it was just 2 weeks, right? I mean,
Right.
They assumed that within 2 weeks they were going to get
The news.
to Bava.
Right, but they didn't hear. So the question is, everything was already broken down. There no longer was a functioning Beit Din in Yerushalayim at the moment of the Churban to tell me when Rosh Chodesh is
No,
going
I'm
to be.
saying, so how come it took 6 months?
Okay, it took 6 months because you couldn't travel. It's as simple as that. You know, El was on strike, whatever. They couldn't travel. It was because of the war. What? That was Rosh Chodesh, but the Rosh Chodesh is not an issue here. The news didn't travel. Pashut didn't travel. Okay, it's a pellet. Took 6 months. Yeah, that's what the Novi reports. That there was such a balagan here in the Middle East that it took time for the news to make it.
But this is reminiscent of what happened with the Ethiopian Jewry. When the Ethiopian Jewry came first here to Eretz Yisrael, they were flabbergasted to find out that Beit HaMikdash
Was not here. Yeah. Okay.
Because
Oh,
they
yeah.
had
Some.
never received that news.
They didn't get that news. Okay, so that's a speech in itself. What did I saw a report of a British historian from 1936 that the Ethiopians had something of a Purim of 3 days of fasting, but they didn't have the Yom Tov. Because what happened was the first set of letters to fast for 3 days made it to Kush. Kush is Ethiopia. Except when they sent out the letters about the Yom Tov, there was a mail strike. So they never got it. They never heard about the Yom Tov of Purim. Okay. Beseda, let's, yeah. Okay, so now we know about these two. Let's look at the poem on the first page. Ezkera Matzok. Matzok from the word mitzuka. I gave you the English so you can follow along with the English. Okay? Ezkera Matzok Asher Kiraani. I will remember the days of oppression. Mitzuka is person, the nation was under oppressed, which occurred to me. Even though it's Kuf Reish Aleph Nun Yud, it's actually from the word kara, Kuf Reish Hey, which means occurred. I remember the oppression, the moments of oppression. Bishalosh makot b'chodesh hazeh hikani. I was smitten, I was hit 3 times in this month. Gid'ani, heni'ani, hich'ani. He uses 3 expressions of being cut, bashed, smitten. They're all different biblical expressions. And then comes a quote out of Sefer Iyov, who also says, Ach ata hel'ani. Those 3 words come out of Iyov, and the phrase is, I'm just exhausted. I just can't go on. I can't go on any longer. I'm totally beaten and exhausted. All right, so we hear from the first stanza that we're going to talk about three different events in the month of Tevet. Diachani, the word di'icha, do'ech, we use in modern Hebrew, means really knocked down. When? Bishmonabo, on the 8th. That's today's date. Smalit v'yamanit. That's interesting how Rabbi Rosenfeld translates this. He crushed me right and left. I think he has a boxing match in mind. You know, a left hook and a right jab and so on. Right, left and right. We got hit left and right. But I'm going to explain to you what this means. I think he missed the point here of what the Smalit Yamanit was. And you see it in the next line. Halo shloshtan kavani tanid. Three things. We've established a fast day. Three fast days. Umelech Yavan insani lichtov dat Yavanit. The king of Greece forced me to write the Torah in Greek, a reference to the Targum HaShivim or the Septuagint, translation of the Torah into Greek. Al gabei chorshim he'erichu ma'anit. Pasuk straight out of Tilim, Perek Kuf Kaftet. Let me just read you the pasuk in entirety because that's important, and then we're going to move on to the next. Give me a second. Let me bring this up. Once upon a time, people had Sfarim, but today we have these digital things. Right. Shir Amalot, Rabat Tzraruni Minorai, Yomarna Yisrael, Rabat Tzrari Minorai, Gamlo Yochlulo. They all tried to get me, says David HaMelech, but they didn't succeed. And he says, Al Gabe Chorshu Chorshim, they would plow on my back, which means scrape, but it's an image from the agriculture of like plowing and making more furrows and so on back. And he says, they kept doing it over and over, and it left a burrow, which he's trying to say is, even though there were many enemies that I had, they were all doing the same thing. But at the end of the day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves him. And here the Paitan uses that one phrase before HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves David HaMelech. It's from Tilim Kuf Kaftet, and he says this. Now let's just say just a few words, because I'm not going to elaborate on this. This is the thrust of my shir tonight at the Har Chorev Shul. It's the fast of the 8th of Tevet, commemorating the great tragedy of the translation of the Torah into Greek. And what I'm going to show that translations are not a bad thing. So why did they make a fast day? Sneak preview, that's for tonight's shir. So that's the fast of the 8th of Tevet. Now, why does he say Smalit Yamanit? This I'll share with you now. There was a famous story of Golda Meir, very famous, when Kissinger came, then Secretary of State Kissinger came to pressure Israel after the Yom Kippur War. So Golda looked at her. This is in the movie Golda, by the way. Golda looked at Kissinger and says, I understand, you're Jewish. You should be on our side. And Kissinger made his famous comment. He says, I'm an American citizen, I'm the Secretary of State of the United States, and I'm also a Jew, in that order. And Golda said, here in Hebrew, we read from right to left. It's a very famous, what the Paitan is saying, Hebrew is right to left, but Greek is left to right. And that's what he's saying, Smalit Yamanit. Diachani b'shmionabo. On the 8th, our alphabet, our Torah was turned around from right to left to right in the foreign language. And just having it in a foreign language, it's a shir in itself, that's what I'm doing tonight, is what was really the damage. But let's move on to the next stanza. This is what I want to focus on. Because the next stanza is going to talk about, next 3 lines, the 9th of Tevet. And then 3 lines down starts the final part. Is Yom HaSiri is exactly what we talk about, Asara B'Tevet, and he even makes casual mention about 5 lines afterwards. Seda hapuraniyot betoch levavi yavir bevo elai hapalit lomar hukta'ir. When that refugee guy shows up and tells us the Yerushalayim was destroyed, so the poet takes into consideration both Churban Abayit issues, destruction. One was the pre-Churban Abayit, and that was Nebuchadnezzar laying siege around Shalim, and the other was the post-Churban Abayit, half a year later, when the Babylonian community caught wind of the fact that there was a Churban. So the poet actually gives us both in a stanza. But let's move back to Zoamti. I'm on the third stanza. Zoamti b'tish'abo b'chlima v'chefer. I was angered, za'am, angered on the ninth, very, very embarrassed, right? How does he translate it? Very embarrassed, with reproach and shame, right? Chasach me'alai, mi'il hod vatsefer. What was removed from me. But we know the word chisachon, to save, but it means here it was removed from me, the mantle of majesty, hod vatsefer. Tarof toraf bo, I was ripped up. What is that going to remind you of? Yosef. Okay, we'll get back to that. Hanotein imrei shefer. Where's that from? Sound familiar? The Birkot Yaakov in Parshat Vayechi. It's this week's parsha. You're going to see it. To Shevet Naphtali. To Shevet Naphtali. We'll get to it in a second. Who Ezra HaSofer? So we're identifying a person. Ezra HaSofer is the pivotal personality in the beginning of Bayit Sheni. He's the one who puts together the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. He is responsible for most of the rabbinic enactments and gzerot, the do's and the don'ts of a rabbinic nature. Many of them go back to the days of Ezra HaSofer. A very, very pivotal person, most probably in the annals of Torah, second to Moshe Rabbeinu. I'm not even exaggerating on this. And it's his yahrzeit, and the tradition that he dies on the 9th of Tevet, and we fasted. The question is, why do we fast? Everybody dies. So why do we make a fast on the yahrzeit of Ezra? Okay, beseder. So Ezra died. Others died as well. What was so tragic that Am Yisrael would have a fast day? So to this end, we're going to try to explain what the fast of the 9th of Tevet. Let's turn the page to the sources on top. So here you have a quote out of Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch in the laws of fasting, it's the very end of the section of the laws of fasting. He has a title called Yamim Shemitanim Bo, days that we fast. I would amend this, days that none of us fast. It's a listing, calendar listing of fast days that none of us observe. Most of us are not familiar with any of the calendar dates. And it's what I would call shonot, which means it's an appendix. It's a miscellaneous type of listing. So it begins with Elu Yamim Shemitanim Behem, even though some of the days are even on Rosh Chodesh, which is amazing. Like, for example, Rosh Chodesh Nisan is mentioned there, the day of the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. Rosh Chodesh Av is mentioned, the day of the death of Aaron HaKohen. And the poskim deal with this. Could we really have ever instituted a fast day on Rosh Chodesh? It's forbidden to fast on Rosh Chodesh. But all right. And then you have all kinds of days that this happened and that happened. A whole list of tragic events, and so on. I say again, nobody fasts any of these days. But we can learn something of historic value from this listing. And it reads, Bishmona b'Tevet, on the 8th of Tevet, Nichtiva HaTorah Yevanit. The Torah was written, translated into Greek, Bimei Talmai HaMelech. In the days of Talmai. Talmai were the Greek kings serving in Egypt, on Egyptian soil. So we happen to know that the Talmais were like Paroi. There's Paroi the first, Paroi the second, Paroi the third. Paroi was the name of the king. It wasn't his personal name. It was the name of the position. So Talmai in Greek, Egyptian Greece, it was the name. So you have Talmai this one, Talmai that one. So whether it means anything to anybody, Talmai Philadelphus the sixth, okay? It's like, like Beethoven's fifth, said, what's the fourth, what's the sixth? Okay. So Talmai Philadelphus the sixth, So he ordered Chachamim from Eretz Israel to send a delegation to Alexandria, and he put them all up in high-class hotels in different rooms with no intercom, and he asked all of them to translate the Torah. How many? 72. Why 72? 72 is actually the sum total of the people who are on duty on the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is 70 plus 1 to make it into an odd number, so it's 71. And there was also somebody who was the manager of the Sanhedrin. So he's like, has a position. He's there. It's almost, yesterday I got a magazine from REITs, Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Chanan from Yeshiva University, and I had a little photo montage of all the Rosh Yeshiva, includes the administrators. Now they don't give shiurim there, but they're on the page because they're part of the institution and they're administrators, so it's the page of the Rosh Yeshiva. Fine. So the page of the Sanhedrin included the manager. Fine. He had a title, and so 72. And we know that in Alexandria, there was a tremendous shul there, and they had 72 seats by the Mizrach. Imagine here they have 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can fight over who's going to sit by the Mizrach, right? So that's 72 of the Zkenim, the elders of the community, were honored to sit on the 72. The word that's used is a Greek word, katedraot. And that was adopted by the universities here when they have a chair in the Department of Math in honor of. So in Hebrew, it's called a cathedra. It's called a cathedra. We use that same word. It comes from that shul in Alexandria, which had an acoustical issue, and people sitting in the back couldn't hear, so they would raise color flags to know if you answered Kedusha, you answered Amen. It's a very interesting Gemara in Masechet Sukkah, Daf Nun Aleph. So here, the Gemara talks about that the Talmai, source number 2, reports that Maaseh b'Talmai HaMelech, shekinei 72 zkenim, the days of Talmai the king in Egypt, he brings 72 elders from Eretz Yisrael, hichnisam b'72 batim, puts them into 72 rooms, nice hotel, ve'lo gila lahem al ma knisam, didn't give them the instructions yet, v'nichnas etzel kol echad v'echad, and each one individually receives the instructions what to do. Kitvuli Torat Moshe Rabchem. I want a Greek translation of your Torah. Natana Kadosh Baruch Hu belev kol echad eitzah. Kadosh Baruch Hu inspires each one individually to make subtle changes. Not only do they make the translation, but they make subtle changes in the translation because they realize that if we translate it literally, we're going to be in big trouble. They're going to understand it wrong, and it can turn out to be a theological chil Hashem. So, for Gemara gives some examples of this. For example, instead of translating Breshit bara Elokim, they translated Elokim bara Breshit. God created the beginning, and not, as King James would say, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Because in the beginning, you can make a mistake and say that maybe there was a deity, a God called Breshit, who created Elokim. So in order to prevent that kind of erroneous translation, they said, Breshit bara Elokim. Fine, so this is the issue of the Targum HaShivim. Again, not going to elaborate further. Let's look at source number 3. Lo Noda. Lo Noda, the Magen Avraham says on the Shulchan Aruch, where it says, let's go back source number 1. It says, Bishmona b'Tevet, on the 8th of Tevet, Nichtava Torah Yanavin b'nei Torah Melech, Vaya choshech ba'olam shlosha yamim. And the darkness descended on the world for 3 days. Again, that's part of my tonight share. And then it says, Ubetetbo, on the 9th, Lo noda ezehi atzara sherubo. We don't have a clue what happened. Isn't that a funny sentence? We have a report of a fast day of the 9th of Tevet, but we don't know what happened. Anybody sensitive to the subject of, we sometimes we have it in the Siddur and sometimes have it in Gemara, censorship. The issue of censorship, because we were worried of how the church is going to look at it. And we know that the church stole texts. Not only they burned texts, but they stole texts. And they had Jews who became Christians, Bumarim, brought over to the Vatican to scan these texts and highlight those problematic things. And that's why we knew we were in trouble. And we altered text deliberately, sometimes censored out whole sections, sometimes changed certain words. So if you take a look at Shmon Esrei today, so in the 19 brachot of Shmon Esrei, the most problematic is V'la Moshinim, the 19th, the one that was added in. The most problematic, because that was added in against the early Hebrew Christians. And the original nusach was, La Meshumadim al Tehi Tikva. A Meshumad was somebody who went over to the other side. You won't find that in any text today. Malmashinim, those who squealed, and Laminim. Oh, we've somehow ironed out the text a little bit, that it should not be directly against so provocatively against the Catholic Church, and try to get away with it. Even that sometimes we didn't get away with it. I would tell you that I once did a survey of what's called Shinui Nusach, changes of Nusach of the brachot of Shmon Esrei. So we have 19 brachot. There's only one bracha in all of Am Yisrael, in every single Eidah, every single community, that says the bracha the same way. One, anybody want to take a quick guess which it might be? Which one? No. I'm saying which bracha of the Shmon Esrei was never altered by any community. By any community. All 18 others have different nuskaot. I thought once it was the first bracha, but I caught it. It's not true. The first bracha was also altered. Yeah. It's Hashivenu Avinu Toratecha on Tshuva. There's no alternate text to the way every single community in the world says Hashivenu Avinu Toratecha v'kovenu makenu b'otecha. Find that, you can make a whole Tshuva drush of that the unity of Am Yisrael around Tshuva. But here it says Lo noda eze yatzara sheruba. We don't have a clue of what happened on that day. It smells of censorship. Of course we know, is that we couldn't write it. We couldn't write it. Now, where did the Shulchan Aruch get this from? So there is a sefer called Megillat Ta'anit. Now, most people who hear the word Megillat Ta'anit think of the book that was written shortly before the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, and it's a type of calendar. It's written in an Aramaic of Eretz Yisrael dialect, and it's a calendar of Yamim Tovim. It's actually Megillat Anti Ta'anit. It's the days that we're not allowed to fast. You're not allowed to fast, you're not allowed to say Espedim, eulogies. Chanukah and Purim are there, and a whole host of other Chagim that happened in Bayit Sheni for all kinds of different things. The Gemara tells us in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, after the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, Botla Megillat Ta'anit Chutz Michanukah v'Purim. The Yamim Tovim of this type of calendar of Chagim were all abandoned and abolished, except for Chanukah and Purim. So that's a speech in itself, why Chanukah and Purim survived. But all the others are already out. There's no mentioning there of any fast days whatsoever. Yet there's another book called Megillat Ta'anit, under the same name, written many years later in the 8th century, and it's just a book about fast days, all kinds of different fast days. And this line that the Shulchan Aruch quotes in source number 1 is lifted out, it's a cut and paste, lifted out of this Megillat Ta'anit. So the scholars call this book Megillat Ta'anit Batra, the last one. It has absolutely nothing to do with the first one. It just carries the same name. So in order not to make a mistake, and it's separated by 700 years, right? And talks about fast days. The other one talks about Yomim Tovim. This is really a book of fast days. And these are mentioned there. And they were mentioned already in the book called the Hagalachot Gedolot of the 7th century. There was known that there was this fast day on the 9th of Tevet. We don't know what happened, but the Halachot Gedolot says that there's a tradition that Ezra and Nehemiah both died on that day. That's interesting. Ezra and Nehemiah. The business of Nehemiah that day, that somehow slipped out of the tradition, because in source number 3 on Shulchan Aruch, on the phrase Lo Noda, we don't know what happened, it says, Ubislichot shalanu, in our slichot, ita means yesh, there is shemet Ezra HaSofer. That's the line we just read in the poem, where it's Zoamti b'tish'a bo b'chlima v'chefer, chasach me'alai mi'il hod v'tzefer, tarof toraf bo hanotein imre shefa, hu Ezra HaSofer. So Ezra is named as having the yahrzeit on the 9th of Tammuz, and we don't understand why we're fasting it at all, but at least there's some type of early tradition. It's post-Gemara, not mentioned in the Gemara, Halachot Gedolot is the 7th century, that there's a yard site here, and there's a yard site on the 9th of Tevet, but we don't really know what it's all about. So this is going to take us, we're going to have to bark up two different trees. So I hope I have time for both of them. Let me just give you the provocative one first, so at least you walk away with some action. And this comes from Professor Sid Lyman, also known as Schneur Lyman, one of the most unbelievable Jewish scholars of our generation. And it was reviewed by another great scholar, Professor David Berger. Both Sid Lyman was taught in Yale, but he's affiliated with the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Yeshiva University. David Berger started out in YU, went to Brooklyn College, now is back in Yeshiva University, Bernard Revel Graduate School, a top scholar of Christian-Jewish relations of the Middle Ages. That's his forte, David Berger. And he gave a hechsher to Sid Lyman's discovery here. And what we're talking about is something absolutely phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. While some of the greats of the Middle Ages suggested an event here, an event there, that figuring out that Esther went into the hall of Achashverosh, it was the 9th of Teves. How can you figure that out? From the Psukim, it was the day before, this or that. It's all conjecture, one on top of the other. But there was a report in a sefer in the 17th century that then concurred with something that was dug up from the 11th century. So it's still, not contemporary of the days of Chazal, of the Mishnah and the Gemara, but nevertheless, something about an individual whose name was Shimon Kafa, or Kafari, or Kafali. It comes in different shapes and forms. Who is this Shimon Kafali? That on the 9th of Tevet, he dies, and Am Yisrael decided to remember him with his yahrzeit, because he did something really great for Am Yisrael. He saved the day. And now Professor Lyman is trying to, like a jigsaw puzzle, put together different pieces. Who is he? What did he do? When did he live? And so on. It turns out that there were some scholars of the 18th century, the name Tzuns and others, they did some math. And they figured out that December 25th, today is 2025, so go back 2025 years, because 2025 is the beginning of the Christian era, right? Today we say BC, we mean before Corona, right? But it was before Yeshu. So when was Yeshu born? So that's what they claim. He was born on December 25th. And that's what the word M-A-S means, the birth of Christ, the Chag HaMolad, the birthday of. Figure out the Hebrew date. You have to plow backwards. It's the 9th of Tevet. I actually made the calculation myself. Okay, that means we're fasting on when the Christians observe as a Yom Tov, the birth. And we're going to fast because of how much we suffered from Christianity. But you can't say that publicly. We forgot. No doubt. Am Yisrael doesn't forget a thing. I mean, we forget where we put the keys, but Am Yisrael does not forget a thing. There are 10 zchirot, zochor and zochor and zochor. It's part of our national psyche. We conveniently forgot because we don't want to talk about it. We can get in trouble if we talk about it. So that's one way. But Sid Lyman says it's way beyond that, and he's not even sure that the correlation's there. Why? Because not all Christian scholars actually believe that Yeshua was born in December 25th. May have been born in March. Beware the Ides of March. Remember that one? That was Rosh Hashanah of March 1st, the beginning of the calendar year. In the Julian calendar was March 1st. So the Ides of March in Julius Caesar, or the Aseres Tshuva. It's where the Ides of March. So here you have at least a beginning of a Christian reference to what the 9th of Tevet was all about. But Professor Lyman then goes on to show that we had major problems with the early Hebrew Christians. You have to realize Christianity started from Am Yisrael. And there were sectarian groups. There was the Tzdokim, there was the Perushim, we were the Perushim. And then there was the Isiim. They were like Chassidim to the extent. They were going to the mikveh all the time. They were Messianic Jews. Messianic Jews who believed that the war against Rome had to be fought, the revolt against Rome, because we are ushering in Mashiach time. They were Messianics. And from this group of the Messianics came those from the Nazarene, from the word Natzrat, who were the followers of Yeshu, who believed that he was actually the Mashiach. He was the Mashiach. From all other points of view, they were quote-unquote Orthodox Jews, Shomrei Torah u'mitzvot. Everything. You'd never even be able to identify them in a shul. And that's why Chazal called them minim. Who are they? We don't know who they are. And Chazal realized that we can't even fight the enemy because we don't even know who they are. They might be your next person next to you in shul. So they created a bracha against the la mashumadim v'la minim, that a Kadosh Baruch Hu should deal them a death blow. Can you imagine in shul, in Shemon Esrei, with davening, that the guy sitting next to you, who's a clandestine Christian, should get a heart attack? That's what we're davening for. In v'la mashinim. That's how, because we felt that Judaism was threatened, and Judaism might become polluted with this, we have to do away with them with a divinely struck death blow. And that's what the Torah bracha enters. But then, and it wasn't working. It wasn't working. It was very popular, very popular. And I just want to say parenthetically, this Dr. David Berger wrote a whole book saying that if we translate the first generation of Hebrew Christians with all their theological beliefs and with the Mashiach being the center of their theology, he translated to the 20th century. He says, welcome to 770 Eastern Parkway. Welcome to Chabad. There, he writes a whole book. I mean, anti-Chabad. The reason why this doesn't sit well with us is because, number one, you get stuck in some, mountain somewhere on Pesach, and Chabad's going to be there to help you with a Seder. I mean, they're all over the place. We know that. I always say there are three things that hit every point in the world. They all begin with the letter C, right? CNN, Coca-Cola, and Chabad. They're all over the place, for sure. And they do great chesed, and they have influence on so many different Jews. So it's very hard to accept that kind of a thing, that they're basically early Hebrew Christians, which what David Berger says. And that's his opinion. I'm not saying I subscribe to it. I'm just telling you this is an opinion out there. So, and he says, if we want to try to understand what the early Hebrew Christians were, it's something like that. Jews who you count to a million, you go to their shul to daven and everything, except that there was a Mashiach at the center of their theology. The idea came up that we have to have a spy to infiltrate the hierarchy of Christianity at the time. And somebody was asked to volunteer, and his name was Shimon. The appellation Kafoli actually in Latin meant rock, and rock becomes Peter. Peter is Petra, the rock in Petra? Petra means rock. So this is this Shimon who we're talking about, who succeeds in going over to the other side and rises in the hierarchy to become the bishop of Yerushalayim, the first bishop of Yerushalayim, and ultimately becomes the first pope in Rome. And he is a spy for Al Chachamim. What is his job? To theologically move Christianity off the track. What they call today a kid who goes off the derech. To move Christianity, or the early Christians, off the track of Judaism. To introduce that the Shabbat won't be the Shabbat, will be Sunday. To introduce the Chagim, slight switch in the calendar. To introduce not really having to be careful about the kashrut, because if it's not Beit HaMikdash, you don't have to have it. He changed the religion so radically that nobody in a million years would think that this is a cheap imitation of Judaism. That's how far he succeeded. And he dies the Pope of Rome. And Am Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael never forgot his chesed that he did. And he dies on the 9th of Tevet, and they fasted to commemorate his Yortzeit. That's what was the basis. There are some sources, but it's not contemporary. That's the problem. Even Professor Lyman says it's a hodgepodge of different sources here and there. We don't have contemporary. We don't have anybody at the time to say this is what happened. But he's trying to put together, based on a variety of sources, and it's a full-length article, And this is his conclusion as a possibility. He even at the end of the day says, as a possibility. He ends his article with, Lo noda eza tzara. We still don't know, but it's a possibility. But what's the story with Ezra? Ezra Sofer? Let's go back to the poem. The poem, Za'amti b'tisha bo, I was angry on the ninth, b'chlima v'chefer, with great embarrassment. Who was embarrassed? Why should Ezra be embarrassed? Why should Ezra be embarrassed at the end of his life as if I failed? Ezra failing? He was the most phenomenal personality. Why would you say he failed? To a certain degree, Moshe Rabbeinu might have said that about himself too. I did a lot, no doubt, but I obviously failed because I was supposed to bring Am Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael, and it didn't work out like that, both personally and then because of the Meraglim, that generation. So, you can talk about a person who has wonderful merits, but one thing went wrong, and it's not a small thing. Chazal say, Yesha kaneh ulamo b'sha'ah achat. Sometimes a person can be completely off the derech, but one thing he did, so Chazal said it about Omri, the father of Achav HaMelech. Why did he deserve to be a king? Because he added one town in Eretz Yisrael. Hosif krach echad be'Eretz Yisrael. Which one? Shomron. He built the city of Shomron. Just for building the city of Shomron, he deserved to be a king. Everything else, bad news. Very bad news. Right? I always say this, I'll even say Lahavdil, great pitcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers, Sandy Koufax, who didn't pitch on Yom Kippur in 1963 in the World Series, right? And everybody all of a sudden heard about Yom Kippur. It was a big Kiddush Hashem, by the way. And they actually beat the Yankees because of it. they
did it again this year.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that was, yes. So the idea of Yesha Kanel Namo B'Sha'achat is, the flip side is there too. You can ruin your whole life with one act. Something about Ezra irked him that he was a failure. Everything he did was wonderful. He was a failure. Why is a failure? So let's go back to the poem. So the poem says, Chasach me'alai mi'il hod vatzefer. What was removed from me was the mantle of leadership. Removed from me. And he's going to say something about Yosef. It's going to remind us of the Ktonet Pasim, which was the mantle of leadership that Yaakov Avinu gives to. It wasn't a new polo shirt that he picked up at Macstock, for 5 shekel. It was a mantle of leadership, as the Rav explained once, that Yosef had to understand that if you're going to lead, then the people aren't robots out there, but they have opinions, and you're going to have to reckon with the fact that people have different opinions. You're going to have to forge it all together, but accept the legitimacy of all the different strands and colors of the Ketonet Pasim. This was his, and that's why the brothers understood that. And they stripped him, Vayavshitu, they stripped him from that mantle because they wanted to show your dreams are nothing and you're not going to be a king over us, and we're going to bury these dreams. That's what the brothers wanted to do, bury the dreams. So here he says, Chasach me'alai, Me'il hod vatzefer, my royal mantle was stripped. Tarof torafbo. He's bringing you to the Yosef. I was devoured, ripped up. Where was Ezra devoured? What happened? And what does it mean? Hanotenim reshefer. What does that mean? Why lift this out of Naphtali's bracha from Yaakov Avinu? Ezra Sofer. So look back on the sources, number 4. The source number 4. We have on the bottom of the page, it's about, source number 4, it's a story about Kiryat Arba. Why is it called Kiryat Arba? Why is Hebron called Kiryat Arba? So everybody learned Rashi, the 4 Zugot, or the Mechava, Ram Yitzchak, and so on, fine. They're all different. What's the pshat? Why is it called Kiryat Arba? You know why it's called Kiryat Arba? Because it was a municipality with 4 boroughs. That's why. It was a municipality with 4 boroughs. It was a big chiddush in municipal. It was a city that had 4 neighborhoods, so it was called Kiryat Arba. That's the pshat. But then the Chachamim come and they give all kinds of drashot of the Kiryat Arba. So the first is Arba Zugotayu, Adam Chava, Avram Yisara, Yitzchak Rivka, Yaakov Leah. And then it goes down and it talks about something about the Levaya of Yaakov, which is this week's parsha in Vayechi. So if you look in the middle, it says, B'kovri asher kariti li, the grave that I dug. Amar Rab Yochanan, I'm on the fourth line of source number 4. Amar Rab Yochanan, Mishum Rab Shimon ben Yotzadak. Ein kira ela loshen mechira. It's a play on words of sale. Shekain bekarsei hayam, in a language, in a dialect of some islands out in the sea. They call mechira kira. They drop the mem. That's a very funny thing. Amar lehu, havuli igirta. What happens here? They were ready to bury Yaakov, and Esav shows up, and he says, "It's my shot to be buried here, and not Yaakov. I want to be buried here. It's my mother who's buried here. Rather, I have the same right as Yaakov, and I'm older, and I deserve to be buried here." So the brothers said, "It's ours. My father bought it. He bought it. All right. Where's the bill of sale? We left it in the safe in Cairo. We moved down to Egypt, and it's in the safe. And here's the levaya. Everything's being held up." So they looked to Naphtali, who Naphtali ayala shlucha, could run speedster like a reindeer, whatever. And that's why, in a fit of sense of humor, the Israel Post has the ayala as their symbol. It's a fit of humor, right? Where it takes about 3 weeks to get a piece of mail from one part of the city to the other. But all right, I shouldn't say Lashon Hara on Eretz Yisrael.
Because the IRS don't have the same Tanaim.
Right.
Traffic.
Okay, there you go. So Nayaftala Ayala Shulcha, and in one day comes back and produces the document of ownership, and Esav has to give in. And that's why Yaakov said, Hanotain Imrei Shefer. Don't read it as Shefer, but Sefer. It means a document. It doesn't mean a book, it means a document. So this is all based on this Hanotain Imrei Shefer. And now the poet is applying it to Ezra, that he's holding up a document, but he was tarof toraf. They ripped him up. They didn't let it go through. So what is this all about? Look at source number 5. Source number 5, the beginning of Masechet Brachot, Avdalid, on the pasuk in Shirat Hayam, Ad Yavor Amcha Hashem, Ad Yavor Amzu Kanita. Double expression, Ad Yavor Am, tells us something. So it says, Ad Yavor Amcha Hashem, Zu Biyah Rishana. This is the first time we came to Eretz Yisrael. Ad Yavor Amzu Kanita, Zu Biyah Shneah. The second time we came to Eretz Yisrael, in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. Mikan Amru Chachamim, from here Chachamim said, Re'uyim hayu Yisrael le'asert lehem nes b'mei Ezra. It would have been fitting for miracles to be performed at the time of Ezra coming into Eretz Yisrael, kederech shenaseh lehem b'mei Yeshua ben Nun, just as the miracles were done as Am Yisrael enters into Eretz Yisrael the first time. It should have been, because Ad Yavor Amcha, Ad Yavor Am Zu Kanita. But it didn't happen. Second Beit HaMikdash was a very low level. You couldn't even see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the process. It was a natural level, very natural level. Ela shegara machet. The sin wrecked it. What sin? The sin was that they didn't come to Eretz Yisrael in masses. That was the sin. Here you have Koresh, the king of Persia, giving a document. Here's the Sefer that Ezra is waving to Am Yisrael in Bavel. We are cordially invited. Koresh opened up the book of Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi, and he saw himself. As Balfour, Lord Balfour in 1917 opened up the book of Haggai and Malachi, and he saw himself as the modern manifestation of Koresh, because he uses the same language of allowing the Jews peacefully to return to their land. He says to build Yerushalayim, to build Beit HaMikdash. Balfour didn't go that far, but this was Koresh. And Am Yisrael, by license, wouldn't have to have an army. who were free to go back to Eretz Yisrael. So how many came back? Approximately 5% of Am Yisrael come back. 95% stay in America. They called it Bavel. It had a different name. But they stayed. They opted to stay. And Chazal said that because of that, the second Beit HaMikdash didn't have a chance to be a long-lasting Beit HaMikdash. Didn't have a chance. Because Am Yisrael balked. They decided not to come. And Ezra, who felt that this was his ultimate mission as a servant of God, fails miserably because he's unsuccessful in convincing Am Yisrael in Bavel to come back. And therefore, in the poem itself, Za'amti b'tish'a bo b'chlima v'chefer, total embarrassment on the 9th of Tevet. Chasach me'alai mi'il hod v'tzefer, the mantle of leadership was stripped from me. Tarof tarafbo, just as Yosef was, as if to say, ripped up and thrown out of the picture, thrown down to Galut, to the exile in Mitzrayim, so too sees Ezra as missing the golden opportunity of bringing Am Yisrael back from the Galut. Hanotein Reshefa, yes, he was holding the document, but it didn't help at all. Who is Ezra HaSofer? Let's look at source 6. I'm going to end with the Kuzari. Sefer Kuzari is Rabbi Yehuda Levi. And I mentioned when we moved here from our Keren HaYesod address that we're on Rehov Usishkin, who was the chairman of the Jewish Agency up the block of Rehov Keren Kayemet, right? This street here was Rehov Yehuda Levi. Just like you have Ibn Ezra and Ramban and Ben Maimon. Who's Ben Maimon? That's the Rambam. But they understood you can't call it Ramban and Rambam. People are going to mix up. So they called it Ben Maimon, which is the translation of Maimonides, son of Maimon. Ben Maimon. So you have all the great Rishonim, Parshanim in this neighborhood, and the great Parshan Usishkin. What happened was it was Yehuda Levi, and Usishkin wanted that there should be a street in the near neighborhood of the Jewish Agency building in his honor before he passes on, because nobody's going to name a street after he dies. So he made sure, in the middle of the night he does this. In the middle of the night, he had the workers from the city change the street signs, and all of a sudden it became Rehov Usishkin. Now, I saw this in the encyclopedia. I didn't make this one up. It's the other stories that I made up. But I saw this encyclopedia that it does this clandestinely. So it is Rehov Yehuda Levi, and Yehuda Levi now is a path in the old city. It's a path in the old city. It's called Yehuda Levi. Fine, more appropriate for Yehuda Levi anyway. So this is a book, the Kuzari. It's like a play where Yehuda Levi, 11th century, takes a figure of the 7th century, a king of Khazar, which is in Turkey, who we know converts to Judaism. And what Yehuda Levi postulates is that there was a discussion between this king and representatives of different religions, and he ultimately is convinced that Judaism is the right way to go, and he converts. But we don't have a text, we don't have a recording of what they talked about, so this is all Yehuda Levi talking, and the Chaver is the representative of Am Yisrael, and the Melech is the Khazar is the king. Fine. So it's like a stage, two people sitting and talking. And the Chaver, the king asks him, and if Eretz Yisrael is so important, how come they didn't come back and buy a Cheni? You know, as we say, good kasha, right? And that's what the Chaver says in source number 6. Hovashtani Melech Khazar, you've embarrassed me. This is the same busha of the poem. B'chlima v'chefer. I'm totally embarrassed. I don't have an answer. Ha'avon hazeh asher mina'anu me'ashlamat ma sheyanu. This sin is what prevented the completion of what should have happened, that a Kadosh Baruch Hu designed for the second Beit HaMikdash, as it says in Zechariah, Roni v'simchi bat Zion. But it didn't happen. Ki kvar haya inyan eloki mezuman. Everything was ready. Lachul. We would have had restoration of Nevuah. Everything would have gone right. But ilu maskimim kulam lashuv b'nefesh chafetza, had Am Yisrael desired to return. Aval shavu mikzatam, partially, only part of them returned. V'nesharu rubam ugdolehem b'Bavel. The majority and their leaders. Rabbi Yehuda Levi is pointing a finger at all those who said, "Well, I can't leave because I'm a shul rabbi, and I got to continue." and I'm a Rosh Hashiva, and I have to continue. He's pointing an accusatory finger at the Gedolim. Ugdolehem, that's what he's saying. Rotzim begalut, they actually prefer galut. They may not admit it, they love it there. Uba avodah, and in their work, in their job, shaloyi pardu mimishkanotehem vinyanehem. They don't want to leave their homes and their jobs, their workplace. They're comfortable there. That's basically what it is. That's what he's yelling. And therefore, unfortunately, this is what happened. And at the end, he says the famous words. And what about the tefillah? V'techazena einenu b'shuvcha l'tzion brachamim, and all these beautiful things. He says it's nothing like the tziftzuf hazarzir, the chirping of the bird, or we call in Hebrew mas patayim. You just lip service. That's all it is. You daven with a lot of kavanah, with talis over the head, don't mean one word of it. Because if a Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us the right to come back to Eretz Yisrael, gives us the possibility, and you don't do it voluntarily. We're not talking about now the Middle Ages where they were oppressed, they were murdered, they were killed, this and that, and you couldn't come to Eretz Yisrael then. Now, what's the excuse? This is Rabbi Yehuda Levi talking in the 11th century. What's the excuse? And then it was hard. This is the fast of the 9th of Tevet. Let's put the two reasons together now. Because Christianity saw in Bayit Sheni a non-authentic Beit HaMikdash. They never saw Beit HaMikdash as a real. They saw Beit HaMikdash the first as the real. And they saw that the Kadosh Baruch Hu detaches from Klal Yisrael at the end of the first destruction. And the whole second Beit HaMikdash, according to Christianity, was just a fraud and everything. We suffered so. Exactly what Ezra is crying about that he was not able to complete in his lifetime is exactly what brought about the entire Jewish history of suffering in the hands of the Christianity. Both of those reasons forged together as being the fast of 9th of Tevet, that we know all about it and prefer not talking about it. Lo noda adam ezehi atzara sherubo. So Mirz Hashem, one day, when this fast will become Yamim Tovim, as in the days of Zechariah, we'll also have a Yom Tov on the 9th of Tevet as well.